is the biggest winner of free agency? That and more this week on the couch, joined by OFBG, Jason Wood. You're probably still licking your wounds from that Super Bowl, but we're all coming out of our football hibernation as the plate tectonics are in motion. Who is the biggest winner of free agency so far?
Pardon my dog, Sigmund. It's great
Yeah.
to be back on the couch. But I would say, listen, based on the absolute circus that we all had to endure on the Pat McAfee show today, I'd say potentially the New York Jets.
Potentially.
Well, potentially because the trade isn't official yet, right? And there's always a chance that there could be brinksmanship in terms of whether or not the Packers try and play hardball and so forth, so on. But I'm going to say that assuming the deal is done and they've got Aaron Rodgers and Alan Lazard, and obviously they hit with Garrett Wilson last year, and now they have a quarterback that should be able to get him the ball. They already had a great defense. They could certainly vault immediately into Super Bowl contention, right? I mean, we've had this strange kind of new modern script, which is that the best way to build a franchise is to draft an elite quarterback and then win a Super Bowl before you have to pay them, right? Like that's plan A. Plan B, it seems like, to then get a really good past his prime quarterback, bring them aboard and try and win at all costs. And that's worked with Tom Brady in Tampa Bay. That worked with the Rams with Matthew Stafford. And now it didn't work with Russell Wilson yet, but now they have Sean Payton. So that story's not finished. And maybe that's what the Jets are trying to do. And both have worked recently. So, you know, if you're not in camp A or camp B, you're probably a sad fan.
Yeah, I think that it all makes sense on paper, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their pass offense really came alive when it was anybody but Zach Wilson. Also, get your trade offer in for Zach Wilson if you want him. Anybody. If Aaron Rodgers, how much was he held back by Mike McCarthy? How much was he held back by Matt LaFleur? How much was he held back by his receivers last year? You know, he's going to bring him with him in Alan Lazard, but he's surrounded by talent. And this looked like an offense that just needed a quarterback last year. Well, they're probably going to get a quarterback. My only pause on this whole situation is what are you getting in Aaron Rodgers? Where's his head, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where's his focus? But we'll see. And it certainly creates a great plot for the AFC East and Buffalo, Miami, New England. New England's got Juju Smith-Schuster.
Hurts my heart, Sig. Hurts my heart.
What does Juju
I love
in
Juju.
New England?
I love Juju, and he didn't even get 1,000 yards playing with the Chiefs, so that was kind of like the best it was going to get. And I'd hope that since they did win the Super Bowl against my beloved Eagles, and he's young and a free, I just thought, okay, the Chiefs will sign him to a reasonable deal and run it back, right? Why not? But didn't work out that way, and I have come to your side, of course, when we were debating the NFL draft a few seasons ago. I was more in the Mac Jones could be good, give him a chance camp. You were in the I can't believe this is who they're going to hand the franchise to. I'm going to say that I've come around to your side. And so, yeah, I think Juju's fantasy upside in New England, even with a 20+% target share, which seems very likely, is meh. It's probably not close to 1,000 yards. It's 4 to 6 touchdowns. It's just not inspiring, and that bums me out because I've always liked Juju.
Yeah, the big question there, I guess, is how much, again, Matt Patricia and Joe Judge, it was just as big of a joke as it sounded. And will an actual offensive coordinator in Bill O'Brien liven that offense back up? Juju moves into Jacoby Myers' role. That was a fantasy relevant role. Of course, you asked the question, at contract terms, at least the announced contract terms were the same. Why not just keep Jacoby Myers? Why not?
It is puzzling. Have you noticed this year that the contracts are incredibly similar across the board?
Yeah.
You're seeing lots of 3-year, $18 million deals with like $11 million guaranteed. Lots of 3 for 33, 4 for 44, all slotted. It's almost by.
It's like the draft.
Contract by numbers now, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the draft in the sense that teams are going to not stray very much from the market that is set. And we've seen in free agency, even as recently as last year, teams setting the market, teams maybe like the Christian Kirk deal. A lot of people thought, wow, now everybody's going to have to pay a markup for their receivers because of that. We haven't seen deals like that this year. There hasn't been a deal. What deal has there even been so far, Jason, that's been panned? Mike McGlinchey, maybe. The Broncos came in. The white tackle's been a problem for them forever, and there was talk that the Bears were going to get McGlinchey, and they swoop in and get him. But there's a lot of really reasonable contracts. Juwan Taylor, not the money, because, hey, when you start every single game of your rookie contract at right tackle in the NFL, you deserve $20 million a year. But that they're moving him to left tackle, where even when Cam Robinson was hurt, the Jags were not putting Juwan Taylor at left tackle. But it's the Chiefs. They always come out smelling like roses. Give me another team that comes to mind when a team that's a winner, a team that you've seen what they've done with free agency and thought, yeah, I like the direction of that franchise.
Sure. Well, I think I'm intrigued by what the Lions are doing, right? I think that, they've made a few moves. It's not like they're overspending, but I think they are shoring up positions of need. I think, again, since we have a fantasy lens on our minds at all times, probably the most surprising move so far in these opening days of free agency was the commitment to David Montgomery. I've always been a fan of Montgomery, but objectively speaking, he was less effective than Khalil Herbert behind the same line. And so I'm not surprised that the Bears moved on from him, but I am surprised that Montgomery, in a market that's just dreadful for running backs that make more than a few $1 million a year, was able to parlay a pretty sizable contract with more than $10 million guaranteed from a division rival. And presumably he slots right into that Jamal Williams role, which yielded 17 touchdowns last year. I don't think he's going to have 17 touchdowns, but he's also much younger and more explosive than Jamal Williams. So that's intriguing. But back to the team, the Lions, for all of the accolades and flowers we're throwing at Ben Johnson and how the team appears to be righting itself, it still has a long way to go to real contention. And that all has to start with the defense. I'm a bit of an outlier in that I thought Aaron Glenn probably deserved to be fired. I know that we all watched the HBO show, and he seems like a super cool guy, and the players seem to love him, and that's great. But like statistically speaking, the Lions defense remains dreadful. And they went out and signed Cam Sutton and Emmanuel Mosley. And as someone who has handled the coverage of the player movement for us for a lot of years, I've learned to really not overreact to the big priced moves and kind of give them a side eye and really get intrigued by the mid-market moves that these franchises make, because they don't get the attention and the media coverage. But when you look back on them in 2 or 3 years, they're usually the ones that seem like really smart deals. And I think both Cam Sutton and Emmanuel Mosley, while not all pro level, they're not Jalen Ramsey, but they're both very effective, and they come from excellent defensive programs. So fundamentally and schematically, they are coming from really well-coached, well-structured situations, and they should step right into a defense that desperately needs corners. So so far, again, I like them. And I want to couch the question, like, as you've asked me who I thought the biggest winner was and then who the biggest team. One of my reticence there is just that I think the world has started to realize that while we get excited about this deluge of free agency news, when the dust settles, it's not going to be the teams that make the biggest splash with the most money that come out on top. In fact, I was discussing this with a number of our younger staff this week, and I pulled some data. And if you look, the vast majority of the Super Bowl teams, meaning those that have either won the Super Bowl or have made it to the Super Bowl in the last 8 years, have been teams that over a 5-year rolling period were toward the bottom of the league in free agent spending, and in particular toward the bottom of the league in outside free agent spending, meaning breaking the bank to bring in people that you are on your team and just not like keeping your own. Keeping your own is much different to me than going out and signing a big splashy free agent. So I'm not to say that it doesn't help. I mean, look, the Eagles had arguably the best roster we've ever had last year, and it was full of people that we signed over the last few years from other teams. So it's certainly a part of the equation, but I think that we have to recognize that you really do truly build from within with great drafts and then keeping your own.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff to sort through there. First on David Montgomery. He gives you Jamal Williams plus. And I wonder if you wonder why they didn't bring back Jamal Williams. Maybe they were looking to upgrade from Jamal Williams. There's also talk that other teams ran on Jamal Williams. Woodrow, we could do a whole show on the state of the running back market and
It's
how
right as fantasy
devastation.
guys, it's shocking, right? I mean, you and I are old heads. When we came in, I mean, running backs were the gold, platinum, and silver ingots for which the entire industry was built. I mean, you needed as many running backs as you could get your hands on, and if you didn't have them, you had no chance to compete. And not only has that changed as fantasy managers and enthusiasts, but the NFL is, I mean, it is arguably, aside from like fullback and long snapper and the special teamers, it is the least coveted position from a strategic standpoint, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, Matt Gay is going to get more than a lot of running backs.
That's right. Yeah.
Samaje Perine going to start for Denver week 1 probably, and he's getting like $3.75 million a year. Something.
Yeah, I mean,
like
the Dolphins are running it back with
why not?
Mostert and Wilson. No, right, but like they're each getting what, like $3 million a year roughly, and
right.
You know, and they seem fine with it, and even we're sitting here, it's like, sure, why not? You know, I mean, I think I think there's only 6 or 7 running backs that have a greater than $10 million AAV, which is why, in retrospect, I was mocking, as an Eagles fan, I felt compelled to mock the Giants, but tagging Saquon made all the sense in the world. Why wouldn't you spend $10 million for Saquon when that's basically the top of the position? Like, that's what you'd have to go and spend in to give anybody. Any running back would be happy to get $10 million now. So why not?
Yeah, and we talked about this previously on the show, but you look at, say, Bijan Robinson, who's going to be a first-round pick. That's basically a 7-year contract. You're going to get the 5th-year option. You tag him twice. You get his 7 best years. No running back's going to get a second contract. What second contract for running backs worked out? Maybe Nick Chubb, but even Mark Sessler from NFL.com is floating out there. Well, the Browns may look at trading Chubb. All of these running backs, Austin Eckler, Derrick Henry, at some point they outlive their
Joe Mixon. Ezekiel Elliott was cut an hour before we went live.
Right.
So.
Right. So it's funny too, just taking Mike McDaniel and Kyle Shanahan, where McDaniel, now the Dolphins are monitoring the Dalvin Cook situation, yet another running back during his second contract the team is looking to shop, but they're fine with going minimal running back because the system creates the value running back. Running backs can add value, but it's not the kind of value that's irreplaceable. You can just get the value that's there created by your offense from a running back and be just fine. I think the league has embraced that. Meanwhile, Kyle Shanahan's going and trading all these picks for Christian McCaffrey. So the Montgomery, but obviously Montgomery is looking like a big winner in terms of fantasy value. Samaje Perine comes out there. And the lines you mentioned, Emmanuel Mosley, the 49ers best cornerback last year, towards ACL, and I like this idea of these 1-year deals because you have a chance to either lock the player up if he rehabilitates from the ACL and returns to form this year, or you get a compensatory pick. I want to mention Nick Korte, or I don't know if you say the E at the end. Nick, Nick Korte. He does peerless work on compensatory draft picks in real time as signings are happening, as people are reporting contract terms. He's saying this is going to cancel out this compensatory pick, or this is going to count as a compensatory free agent for this team. And it gives you an idea of that extra dimension that's going on in free agency. And I think you're seeing the smart teams. Who are the teams that their players are generating compensatory picks? Well, I mean, we could say Philadelphia, right? Andre Dillard. He's going to actually generate a compensatory pick depending on what they do. We'll talk a little more about the Eagles. And so signing players that were released, or even signing these players to 1-year deals, set you up. Like when DJ Chark does get signed, the Lions are going to get a compensatory pick, or at least have one of their compensatory free agent signings canceled out by that in the formula. And then Cam Sutton, I was so frustrated. Frustration. Well, and maybe the problem is he's a slot corner because the Steelers let probably one of the 2 or 3 best slot corners in the game go in Mike Hilton. Maybe the problem is they see him as a slot corner and he wants to play outside corner. But Cam Sutton is a good player. I just know that. He's a good player. The Steelers don't have enough good players in the secondary. And they bring in Patrick Peterson. Okay. You mentioned Jalen Ramsey while we're on the subject of cornerbacks. What did you think of Miami making that move and going out and getting Ramsey? It happened before free agency, but it certainly is another one of those moves that is an announcement, as we're talking about Aaron Rodgers at the top, an announcement that, hey, we're going for it. We're going for it right now.
Well, I think you just hit on it, right? It's in a vacuum. Why wouldn't you acquire Jalen Ramsey? I know that there were some out there saying that he got burned a lot last year. And look, there are lots of ways to slice and dice cornerback play. But I think objectively speaking, we know he's a known commodity. He's still in his prime. He's healthy. And I know PFF graded him quite well even last year as a coverage corner. So I think, again, I don't question the talent of the move. But I think you hit on it, though. That's the kind of move you make when you feel like you're ready to go win a Super Bowl, right? Like it's the cherry on top of the sundae, the equation, this thing that you've built. And I think Miami thinks they're closer to contention than I think they are. I'll leave it at that, right? I just don't see the rest of the pieces adding up to a legitimate contender in the AFC. Now I know they looked the part for half a season, and then Tua got the concussion. So maybe I am selling them short. I guess we'll find out soon enough. But I thought, okay, this is interesting to me. Like I juxtapose it against and I hate to give this team credit because they're our arch rivals, but the Dallas Cowboys went and traded for Stephon Gilmore. Now, Gilmore is, 6 years older than Ramsey, but Gilmore was elite last year. Elite. He played as well as he's ever played, and he's certainly not suddenly going to hit the wall and be past his prime. And they're already a very good to elite defense, and I think closer to contention. I mean, I thought the Cowboys were one of 4 NFC teams last year that legitimately had a chance to win the Super Bowl. So I think for them, that move makes a ton of sense, even though Gilmore's only, I think, 33. So again, he's older. Then I see Miami with that move. But hey, again, maybe I'm selling Miami short. What do you think?
I think that you're right that, look, this is what do we see in the NFL? You usually have to go to the playoffs a year or two and get taught a few lessons about, okay, you can make it to the playoffs. This group of players can make it to the playoffs, but how do you get over the hump, especially for quarterback play? And with Tua, putting all the potential injury concerns aside, that's a big thing to put aside, and they go out and got Mike White. Okay, that doesn't really excite me any more than Teddy Bridgewater, or less than Teddy Bridgewater. And I just think that this is a team. If we're going to say, it's funny, Woodrow, if their defense does take a step forward, and it's not going to be because of Jalen Ramsey, it's going to be because of Vic Fangio. That's maybe their biggest offseason addition. And I think Mike McDaniel's the kind of head coach that's just going to say, it's your defense, big dog. Do your thing, and get out of the way. So they certainly have the talent on defense. Like you say, they look the part. But I think that to expect them to be able to beat a Cincinnati, to be able to beat a Kansas City, to be able to beat a team that is battle tested, even a Buffalo in the playoffs, it's the first time this team really has a chance to do something in the playoffs is asking a lot.
I agree.
So we'll see. We'll see. But another thing I want to mention about Miami while we're on the subject, they picked up a really good linebacker in David
Long. Yeah, I was going to mention that. Yeah, that's
really
great. See, that's the kind of signing that doesn't get the press, but the IDPers out there know that's a guy that I think may end up helping them as much as Ramsey when the dust settles, or certainly be as big a part in the equation if they do get over this hump and become a real contender.
Yeah, Tennessee lost a lot of talent in free agency, but they did get Andre Dillard.
Tennessee is one of the heat map most ransacked so far, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I've got to mention Tennessee also signed Arden Key, and I want to mention this as a winner that is not necessarily a team that's going to jump to mind as a winner in free agency, but I think it comes back to some of the things you were saying. Arden Key was a reclamation project for Jacksonville. And I think his deal is like 3 years, $21 million. I think it's going to come in above the line for compensatory free agents. And I'm putting together the newsletter for tomorrow. It's going to be a marathon, like 25 or 30 pager. The report on free agency. It's crazy. Like I'm even looking at it myself. I'm like, wow, this is going to be a lot of stuff, a lot of thoughts. But Jacksonville, I have nothing. I have nothing for Jacksonville because they haven't done anything. Because now they did go on the spending spree last year, and no longer do we dunk on Trent Baalke because they had a plan last year. They enacted the plan, and it actually was a perfect fit for the offense and the personnel they had in terms of a quarterback and coaching. And then the biggest move they made was to go get Calvin Ridley last year during the season, right? Totally under the radar during the season. Then when it leads up to Calvin Ridley's reinstatement, people are paying more attention to it. And it's exactly what the offense needs to go up to the next level, I think. And they're set. And Jawan Taylor, I just want to mention this because it's one of those chef's kiss moments. They draft Jawan Taylor again. Jawan Taylor starts 68 out of a possible 68 games for the Jags at right tackle. Didn't even miss a snap until this year, this past season. Incredible availability is the most important ability, right? And then he's going to generate a 3rd round compensatory pick for them. And then they have Walker Little, who they signed 2 years ago,
right?
The Trent Baalke ACL special, right? I think he was an ACL player. And he looked pretty good in a small sample last year. Chances are he'll be the right tackle. They did leave open the idea of him playing guard. I don't know about that, but he has 2 years left on his rookie contract. I mean, isn't that how you do it? On an $8 million 2nd round pick contract from Jawan Taylor, they get a starting right tackle, generate a 3rd round pick for him, and have someone ready, cost controlled in the offing. You got to like what Jacksonville's doing. And generally, Woodrow, like you said, the teams that are less active in free agency, that's a sign that they're a good team, or a sign that they have a plan, they're enacting it, they're staying with it. Because going back to some of the larger issues here, like you said, keeping your own, teams always get more bang for their buck when they keep their own. Usually they get, if not some kind of discount, because we did see a few more players get to free agency, but then stay with their team, which is more unusual. Usually you get that discount. The Packers were doing this year after year after year. Like Jordy Nelson's contract comes to mind, where if you can get somebody signed before the market is set, you're almost always going to get a discount. But when it's a player that is in your franchise, in your organization, you know the player. You understand exactly what you have, and they've already been adapted, acclimatized to your culture, to your system, to your coaching, to their teammates. When a player hits free agency, with the exception of teams that are in cap problem land, you have to ask why. Why would they hit free agency? Now, there might be some answers that don't indict the player, but chances are you overspent. Now, again, I'm going to talk out both sides. I also say Jacksonville and what they did, bringing in Christian Kirk and Zay Jones and Evan Ingram. And that's another big move they did, is franchising. Maybe they'll give Evan Ingram a long-term contract. So Jacksonville, I'm going to tip my hat to Jacksonville. I want to just ask you your opinion on this. We've talked about this a lot on the show already. Just what's your knee-jerk reaction to what's going on with Lamar Jackson?
It is a perplexing situation on a lot of levels. I think that, like, the capitalist in me, right, like the professional investor in me, appreciates the Ravens trying, I think, to say there's a market, there's a fair price for everyone, and we don't want to overpay just because an outlier in Deshaun Watson changed the market, right? On the other hand, because we're fans and these players aren't just box scores and, video game icons, like, what more could you ask, right, of Lamar Jackson for the franchise, for the team? What do the fans think of him, right? I mean, he's won an MVP, right? We don't have to go for his bona fides, but I do think it is this fascinating dichotomy where I think you could absolutely make a very compelling, intellectually rigorous case that they're doing the right thing in letting him go out and negotiate the market. And if there's a real market for him, they will get price discovery, which is what you always want if you're a buyer of an asset, and then likely match it happily. What I'm really unclear about here is what's going on with the fact that seemingly no one even wants to have a conversation with him. Now, far be it for me to cry collusion, but it is odd, right, that we got 4 or 5 very prominent, well-respected beat writers coming out like within microseconds of the tag saying, "Oh, this team, which is an obvious suitor for Lamar Jackson, just has no intentions to even speak to him." And so I have to think that there's some brinksmanship on the ownership there, and that really bums me out. That disappoints me. But I also think that the longer we go without any news, the more I have to think that this ends with them giving him a deal and him staying, right? Which is somewhat anticlimactic and doesn't play into the emotional tug of war we've probably been going through with all this. But I think that probably is the most logical. I mean, as the deck chairs start filling up with this game of musical chairs quarterback, I mean, there aren't as many obvious spots. I guess if there's a training camp or preseason major injury to an important starter, that could change the game again and reopen things. But I don't know, Sig, I'm assuming he comes back. Whether or not it affects his play or his focus or attention or drive, I probably not. He seems like a great competitor. He's a team leader. He still wants to win. So I'm pretty excited by adding Todd Monken. I think he could unlock some good things with Lamar in that offense. So I think winning cures a lot of ill will, right? So I'm currently assuming that when the Bullets start flying, Lamar Jackson will be the Baltimore Ravens franchise quarterback. Yeah. But I am confused, and I will say one thing. I know that I'm not really on the social media Twitter engine anymore, but I did see someone post Lamar Jackson yesterday tweeted that basically trying to snipe at people saying he's not a fool and that he doesn't need an agent. And he mentioned in his tweet that the Ravens offered him 3 years fully guaranteed $135 million or $133 million, I think. And he was scoffing at that. And I said, well, I'm going to assume when he says fully guaranteed, it's really fully guaranteed. And if that's true, he should take the deal, because that would be the second most fully guaranteed money in NFL history for a quarterback. Only Deshaun Watson got more guaranteed money. That would be more guaranteed money than Patrick Mahomes took or Josh Allen took. It would also, from an AAV standpoint, be smack in line, like per annum at $44 million a year with what Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes make. So I guess you could argue, should he get more years? But in terms of like the parameters, 3 for 133 is an incredibly fair deal. Does Lamar deserve more than fair? Well, that's for the market to decide.
Yeah, I think that then brings you to wonder, is it just that the relationship is broken? Is it just that the relationship
right? But then what does Lamar do, right? Like, is anyone else out there able or willing to give him $44 million a year with $130 million in guarantees?
No, and there, like you said, I mean, collusion is impossible to prove. So why we're not going to throw that word around, but there's just gentlemen's agreements, I think that owners talk. It's a cartel. The NFL is a cartel, and I'm sure that they were all really peeved at Jimmy Haslam for resetting the market. But you're right that from the intellectually rigorous standpoint for Lamar Jackson, having a 3-year fully guaranteed deal, which then allows him to reset at whatever the market is 3 years from now, is probably pretty smart.
Yeah. I know when you had a great conversation on the couch recently where you opined a bit about you were kind of bummed and wish people gave a little more grace to him deciding not to have an agent. And I get your perspective, but I have to say, don't you think though, again, putting aside, like, I think he should have the emotional right to do what he wants to do, but I have to think an agent would be helping bridge the gap here a bit, right? In the sense that, like, a good agent would be telling him, you have to take the Deshaun Watson contract out of your mind. It's an absurd outlier. No team is going to give you anything close to that, because no one should have ever gotten that in the first place. Like, don't you think that there is that gap here? Because he seems to still think that he is on par or better than Deshaun Watson. Ergo, NFL history has always been like, if you're the next man up at quarterback and it's your time to get paid, you get to reset the market. And I get that, but outliers happen. And I think an agent would help him understand that a bit.
Yeah, I think an agent would tell him, just, this is the actual range of possibilities, and we can't do anything more than this. So it's hard, though. I mean, it's difficult. I mean, again, I like you said, I made this point recently. I understand why Lamar Jackson doesn't trust anybody. Basically, I think that's probably what it is. He's just like, I don't trust any of y'all to look after my best interest except for me.
Right.
And we'll see what happens. Let's talk some Eagles. We were going to talk some Eagles. Darius Slay gone, and that's a player who will be able to be signed without any compensatory pick damage. James Bradberry kept.
Yes. Well, not surprising either, right? Because Darius Slay counted more than $20 million against the cap. Deservedly so. He's been phenomenal for us. He's certainly worked out to anything we could have hoped for. But my understanding is, and again, this is hearsay, it's not like I talked to Darius Slay, but he was uninterested in taking a cut, reworking his deal substantially. And whereas James Bradberry fits into that category we were talking about a bit earlier, where the really good teams sometimes play the slow hand, people forget that we signed James Bradberry and Gardner Johnson for very low cost deals very late in the free agent cycle because they were cast-offs of their existing teams who decided they didn't want to pay them. So Bradbury played exceptionally well for us. I think he fits into the scheme well. And, I think 3 for 33, there's that 3 for 33 again, for a proven, experienced, effective NFL corner is very fair price, right? Whereas 20 plus, you got to kind of be an all-pro, top 5 corner in the market to justify that. And as good as Darius Slay has been, he's not that. So I'm not surprised by either of those. I'm not surprised we lost Javon Hargrave. He was arguably the second or third most coveted free agent at any position. Surprised by the fact the 49ers went and got him. That surprises me that they were the ones that won his services. Not surprised our OGs in Kelsey and Brandon Graham came back for team friendly deals. Not surprised at all that if you the Eagles have a massive list of potential key contributors that were in free agency. And if you sort of sourced rank that list, it gets back to what we were saying about running back. Not at all surprised that we were moving on from Miles Sanders. He's kind of an obvious one because of the position. So I can't say I'm overjoyed with the state of the Eagles free agency because I knew we'd be losing some key cogs, but so far I'm not like distraught over it either because the people we've lost, I was kind of resolute that we were going to lose. TJ Edwards is a tackling machine, but he is still ultimately a linebacker that hasn't stayed particularly healthy until recently. And I knew that some team would give him a ton of money, and I wish him well. So we drafted Nakobe Dean last year.
Exactly. He's going to be.
So, listen, anytime you have a team that's a contender and you have to pay a quarterback, which we're about to have to do, you have to make hard decisions. And now the job will be for Howie and the personnel department to continue to get it right in the draft. And if they do, the team will stay in contention. If they have a bad draft or two, then the team will fall back into mediocrity.
And the Eagles are another team, by the way, 4 compensatory free agents, 0 signed. So by developing a TJ Edwards, by developing a Marcus Epps, by preserving the value of Andre Dillard, and then of course with the Hargrave, and then they're going to get a compensatory third. And I think the Eagles brought about Hargrave ending up a 49er because the 49ers watched their defense get flattened and said,
right,
we got to do something about that. And it just makes me sad again. It's always a 1 degree separation from Steelers misery. He'd still be a Steeler, Javon Hargrave. They usually don't let some good ones get away. Let's do an NFC South whirl around.
Let's do it.
Panthers trade. React to me.
I don't want to be anticlimactic here, but it all comes down to who they take and if it works out, right? It's the old conundrum of they're doing it obviously to fix and find a franchise quarterback. If whoever they pick ends up being a high level franchise quarterback, none of the rest matters. The price was more than worth it.
No.
It's that simple, right? And no one's going to remember what they gave up for it. I do not have a guess as to who it is. I know, again, your last week, you guys were opining and lovingly about Anthony Richardson. If it's him, cool. I will say, for what it's worth, I would say signing Andy Dalton to a relatively modest contract with basically 1 year's worth of guaranteed money would indicate that they're thinking, all right, we'll start Andy and develop the youngster. Does that mean a developmental quarterback like Anthony Richardson? I don't know. Maybe not. I personally, again, I'm no Matt Waldman, but to me, CJ Stroud would be the top pick. But I don't profess to have any real edge there. It's just my own personal opinion. So I'm fine with the deal. I have some Bears friends that are disappointed in the take, and that surprises me because they got 4. They effectively, if Ryan Poles does his job, they traded away the first pick on a quarterback that may or may not work out for 5 impact young starters, right? Like that. If they do their job, that's what those picks yield because you got DJ Moore plus 2 firsts and 2 seconds. So if Poles hits, he's get 5 starters for a team that's desperate across the board at all levels for talent. And that seems like a pretty reasonable starting point to rebuild this team from the ground up, right?
Yeah, it does. And the DJ Moore part of that trade, 2 more years, signed at $20 million a year. You're just not going to. There's no wide receivers. Jerry Jeudy. We'll see if Denver can get a first round pick for him. Well, okay, But I think that you can see that to get an impact receiver, that was something. We've been falling all the way only down to number 9 in the draft. They're still going to get somebody very, very high on their board.
They could get Jalen Carter, which is who a lot of us thought they'd get if they stuck there, right?
Right. Right. I mean, and Eberflus, that's the guy, right? The 3 tech is what makes that defense go.
Yeah.
So, I think the Bears are set up well. But like you said about the Panthers, all people are going to remember about this trade is Justin Fields. If Justin Fields is good, then everyone will say brilliant trade. And if Justin Fields isn't, and Bryce Young or CJ Stroud or Anthony Richardson, all 3 are good, they're going to say they messed up.
Where do you sit on it? Because you've asked a lot of your preseason couch guests, me included, about it, but I don't know that I know as we sit here where you sit on all this. I know you and I both very much wait for our buddy Matt to publish his RSP, and we devour that, and it helps form our own views on these things. But I'm curious, I mean, what you think in terms of if you were the Panthers on the clock, do you have a lean as to how you would approach it?
Yeah, I would still go with Bryce Young. I think the most important thing is the processor, and he's got the best processor. He's got that. Again, I've described it as just absorbing visual information with, of course, all the context that you understand, pre-snap reads and so on, and validly acting on that visual information, making good decisions quickly. He's got that. And if there was a problem with his height, it would have showed up frequently in the SEC. So I'm not if there's a problem that he's not formidable enough physically to stand up against NFL rushers, I'm not worried about that. But I think CJ Stroud, there's a lot of smoke for good reasons that he's the pick, and I'm not going to say that's bad. I'm not even going to say that Anthony Richards is bad. I will say that Andy Dalton, 2 years, $11 million. Did anybody watch him play? Scott Barrett actually put some good stuff out there. Andy Dalton was solid last year.
Totally solid. Yeah, absolutely.
And the Saints, this is the next team we're going to go to. The Saints should have saved about $25 million a year and just kept Andy Dalton instead of going with Derek Carr. But now you got Derek Carr. And you got Michael Thomas coming back. He had a big guaranteed money bomb that was going to explode if they didn't redo his deal in some way. Any chance you'll be back in on Thomas with Carr, or otherwise, do you think Carr is a substantial upgrade? Maybe not as substantial as the money, but enough to say, hey, this team could win the division?
I do think Derek Carr is an upgrade over Andy Dalton over a 17-game season. I don't think he's a massive upgrade. I think that Derek Carr is it's weird. I mean, in a lot of ways, I think I look at what the Saints have done and I think, okay, and I don't think they're a terrible team, but I don't think they're a legitimate contender.
Right.
And I think part of it again is where's the vision, right? Like you always talk about clarity. When you look at these franchises, whether they're at the bottom of the standings like the Bears, but you can see a path, right? Maybe you don't agree with the path, but you can identify what they're trying to do, how they're trying to rebuild, or the teams at the top. Again, like we talked about the Eagles, 49ers, okay, we see why they're at the top, but they have tough decisions to make, but we still see what they prioritize, what they don't. I don't know what the Saints are without Sean Payton at the helm. I mean, Dennis Allen, it was a pretty moribund year last year. Again, they weren't statistically, they weren't terrible, but they certainly weren't ever a team where any given week you were like, oh man, the Saints could be something. I look at their roster now, and there's lots of names on the roster. They have they've invested a lot in their line. I mean, it's all first, second rounders on the line still, and with experience. So it's okay, yeah, they on paper could be a contender in what's probably going to be a very jumbled division. I mean, I think the Buccaneers, especially after this Mayfield signing, are all but guaranteed to be. I mean, I think they're low key playing for the first overall pick next year for the Caleb Williams lottery. So I think it's up for anybody. It's anybody's grasp. Derek Carr is good enough to win a division. I don't think he's good enough to win and get to a Super Bowl. And yeah, to your point about Michael Thomas, I don't know about you, Sig, but I'm really surprised that Michael Thomas took a 1-year prove-it deal to stay in New Orleans. And maybe that speaks to his character. Maybe he doesn't want his time and the memory of Saints fans to be these last few years of washed out non-performance. Maybe he wants to go out on a higher note, and I respect him for that if that's true. I know there's some talk well, who else was going to sign him? But again, given what he's done when he was healthy and that it was a very weak free agent class for receivers. I mean, exceedingly weak after a very strong 2022 class. I think there would have been a team or two that would have happily given him a 1-year, $10 million deal on a flyer, including like the Chiefs, right? So let's put it this way. I'm open to Michael Thomas being someone we talk about as a meaningful fantasy contributor in 2023. But my current projections that are live on the site don't project him that way. And in part because Chris Olave, I think, is the real deal. And I have Olave with 135 targets, 23% target share. I still think even if Thomas is healthy, I think at this point in their respective careers, Olave should be the alpha, and Thomas could be one awesome number 2 if that's the case. So yeah, I'm not like overjoyed with Thomas, but I think the price tag will be cheap on draft day as well. So he's definitely someone I could see rostering, particularly if he's actually practicing each and every day early in camp.
Right. If it's this, and I know it ended up terribly last year, but I think last year was about a 6th round pick. 6th round pick. This year, if he's an 8th, 9th round pick, the risk and reward still balance out, especially with Carr there. I think Dennis Allen's the problem. It's kind of like Mike McCarthy in Dallas. Like the head coach is going to hold back the team, and that's
the offense I'm most out. I mean, I know we don't have much of a industry consensus yet because a lot of sites are still. Understandably, we don't, they haven't formulated their projections yet because we don't have rookies and we don't have free agency finished. But among to whatever extent I can gather consensus among our peers or people I keep in touch with, I feel like right now I'm the one I'm most an outlier view of is the Cowboys offense. I think Dak QB 17 right now. One, I don't think Dak played particularly well last year. I mean, I think his career has been solid for sure, but I don't think he played particularly well. And as you probably know, Sig, I mean, I just think until proven otherwise, it's indefensible that they could make Kellen Moore the scapegoat. I think it's indefensible. Kellen Moore was an offensive coordinator for not one but 2 head coaches, and he has coordinated and called plays for the number 1 offense in the NFL twice already in his 4 years as a play caller. The only year he wasn't a top 5 play caller was when Dak was hurt. Understandable. The Cowboys were decimated that year. And yet, like, he's the scapegoat, but you saw what really the NFL really thinks of him, because within milliseconds of being parting ways with Dallas, he was signed by the Chargers, which I think was brilliant. And listen, I once defended Mike McCarthy when the Cowboys hired him because I thought he was actually quite a good head coach for much of his time in Green Bay. But his effectiveness as a play caller, when he was a play caller in Green Bay, step functioned down as the NFL evolved. He did not evolve with the NFL. And then I thought, okay, well, maybe he's watched the last few years the NFL evolve and he's ready to get back at it. And then you read these statements at the combine, right, where he's talking about how you can't make this stuff up. I mean, when he's talking about how Kellen wanted to throw 40 times a game, and there are times when you might need to do that, but generally you don't want to do that, and we really have to run the ball to keep our defense fresh. I'm like, is this Bill Parcells 1982 again? Because not only that, but like, it's one of those things where he doesn't even know what he's talking about, because in the entire time that Dak was healthy and Kellen Moore was the play caller, Dak threw 40 times a game, like 2.5 times a year. Like, they were not a particularly prolific team to begin with. Like, so if he thinks that the Cowboys were already too pass happy when they were just about right when it comes to run pass balance, I just shudder to think what this offense is going to look like. So look, maybe I'm overreacting because they do have a ton of talent, right? The line's good. I think Dak is good. They have obviously CeeDee Lamb. They hit on him. So I'm not saying they can't be a very good offense, but right now I think I am leaning towards this being a bit of a train wreck.
Yeah, well, I'll never forget the famous moment when Jerry Jones is like, he watched in his year off, he watched every single game, and later I'm like, well, actually, you job interviews, you say things. Apparently,
I'm like, can you hire me? Because I did that too.
Right.
You want to hire me?
Right. And apparently, he didn't watch his own team either, as you said. And something that you do as you're evaluating, which companies are investment worthy, is you're looking at the management, you're looking at the leadership, and you're saying, is this leadership going to help this group of people overachieve? And I just don't know how you can say that about Dallas. So you mentioned it, and this is the dedication and also the wealth of experience you have doing projections. So you already have preliminary projections for this year?
Well, Joe threw down the gauntlet and said, hey, Woodrow, we've always done the projections a certain way, but the industry is trending towards sooner the better. So as you remember, Sig, we used to have projections, and this is years and years ago when fantasy was still a niche thing. We'd have projections up around camp, right? Like like, because once we knew the rosters were largely set, and then that kept moving back to where generally Footballguys has historically in modern times put out our full sets of projections on the day after the NFL draft, right? Like that was kind of the new benchmark. But then Joe and Clayton said, hey, I think the industry is trending towards all year round, and I said, well, let's give it a roll. So we went live with full every team, every player projections on February 20th.
Yeah, wow. So that gives you the backdrop. Give me an idea of a player or two that over the last couple of days you've gone back and had to ask yourself, how much am I going to change this player? How much am I going to change this offense? It could be something thorny. It could be something that you surprise yourself. You're like, well, I guess we're just going to have to project this player for now at this level. What are some projection changes that stood out over the last couple of days?
Yeah, I mean, the one that comes to mind is and it's going to make sense because it's a corollary of one of my more surprising signings, which is with the Chicago situation. I had assumed that Khalil Herbert, I didn't doubt his talent, but I thought that, okay, let's see how this shakes out. Like, because I thought there was a decent chance, given how much money they have, and that the running back market isn't super hot, that David Montgomery would just resign with them, because the GM did say, oh, I'd love to have him back. So I thought, okay, they've got other things to worry about, and they've got plenty of money to spend. Like, Montgomery will resign for 2 or 3 year deal, and it'll be a committee, and we'll just go off with it. But no, that's not what happened, right? So then I took a harder look at Herbert, because he was projected I had him projected and ranked as as a heavy usage RB2 in a committee, right? So like, it was like, okay, he probably wouldn't be someone that you'd want in your lineup every week, but certainly if Montgomery got hurt, he'd be an insta start. But then I thought, okay, well, I'm looking at the rest of the roster. They did sign Travis Homer, but he's a third down scat back type of a guy. Now, and this could all change again if they draft somebody or whatever. But based assuming that they're committing to him for 2023 as their lead back, he was freaking awesome when he got the chance. So I looked, and in the 2 years that he shared the backfield with Montgomery, there were 6 games in the last 2 years that he got at least 50% of the offensive snaps. And, you always want to be careful projecting small sample sizes. But in those 6 games, it projects out to him basically being a 1,440 yard rusher, with 8 touchdowns over a full season. Will he get that? I don't know. But I think that, the point is he could see a 20% drop in his per game efficiency from when he was the starter in those 6 games, and still be, in today's landscape, a must-start fantasy running back, right, every week in any format. So he's jumped way up. He's in the top 20 now, right now. So that was probably the biggest mover. And then I think at another, thinking about other positions, I think that one I'm puzzling with, because we also project free agents and where we think they'll slot. I had Dalton Schultz still as a top 7 fantasy tight end. And he may bounce back there, but the lack of action on prioritizing signing him has me wondering, because as you know, there's a fine line between fantasy relevance or not in tight end. And I thought he was just a layup. Like, the first thing we hear is that the Chargers were signing him, because Kellen Moore would value him. Same guy, same system. Hasn't happened. Maybe it still does. If it doesn't happen and he signs elsewhere, I think he kind of falls into just another guy territory. So those are 2 that come to mind, I think. And look, I guess, and this is more for like Dynasty, Devy, or Best Ball, because we have to project based on the rosters as they exist. I had Kyle Trask as draftable in Best Ball and as and Superflex, because I thought, well, I mean, why, what do the Buccaneers have to lose then to give this kid a chance for a year? And if maybe it doesn't work out, it may be more like a Davis Mills situation, but we'll find out for the year, and maybe it does work out. And obviously now that they've signed Baker Mayfield, we see how that script's going to go, right? They're both going to play, and they're both going to get benched for each other, and it's going to be ugly.
Yeah. And like you said, that's a team you look for, maybe jockeying for that number 1 pick, although they do have some talent on that.
How about you? Does anyone stand out for you? I mean, that I'm not thinking about offhand?
I think that your point on Herbert is a good one, because the fantasy industry is so in lockstep now, or so quick, that the automatic response to Dave Montgomery signing is sell Khalil Herbert, because everybody's going to think Khalil Herbert's going to get the starting job, but they're going to do something. And this is just a very brief window where you can sell him in a dynasty league. I think Alfredo Brown, he does amazing work for us, did some polls and said, people who want to sell Herbert will want an early second for him. People that want to trade for Herbert. We'll give up a late second for him. So mid-second seems about the spot. And I don't know. A running back, you might get a running back in the mid-second that you like talent-wise, but I don't think they will have proven that they can do in the NFL what Khalil Herbert has already done. You know this is going to be a good run offense. They got another good, by the way, this is just another, sorry, Titans fans, Nate Davis, another really good player from the Titans. They he knows how to run block, right?
The Bears are interesting. They've as we knew, they were coming, worst team in the league, quote unquote, theoretically have their quarterback, made the big trade, had just an insane amount of money to spend, right? Like just gobsmacking amounts of money to spend. So we knew they'd be aggressive. I think so far so good for them. Like I think the only deal that I'm side-eyeing a bit is probably the one that got the most headlines, and that's Tremaine Edmonds.
Right.
Because it's a really big number for a guy that while he played well this year in coverage, historically has been effectively a two-down player, right? He's been terrible in coverage for most of his career. And I'm not saying he's not a valuable cog in the wheel, but I was surprised he got that money. But then when you look at what they paid DeMarcus Walker and TJ Edwards and the Nate Davis signing, and again acquiring DJ Moore, like I think overall for a team that had like insane amounts of money to spend, so far they've shown some discipline, and that's pretty encouraging if you're a Bears fan.
Absolutely, there's some prudence there, and I think you're right to highlight Khalil Herbert. I already mentioned, from a fantasy angle, I already mentioned Samaje Perine. I think he's going to be underrated across the board. We didn't mention him when we talked about the Eagles. Rashad Penny becomes really interesting. I know Boston Scott's back. I think that they've got their backfield. Again, it's always a risk reward. Well, if Rashad Penny is going in the 8th, 9th, 10th round like he was last year, then sure, I'll dip my toes in those waters. Just because the production is almost automatic from the running back position in that offense. That stands out. What
do you make of Darren Waller going to the Giants?
Yeah,
because that's one that's like, he's 30 years old, right? Like he's coming off a pretty disappointing season, to say the least. But it's just a gaping hole on the Giants offense. It's also not only did they need a tight end. I mean, I know some people are high on Bellinger, but he hadn't really shown anything yet. But they also just right now have a terribly anemic receiving core overall. Now this offseason's not over, and I'm sure they'll draft somebody. But right now it looks like you're paying Daniel Jones all this money. If Brian Daboll's in year 2, like they need playmakers like to make it worth all work. And so like on paper, Waller could be like back to being one of the few elite tight ends in a world where there really aren't such a thing as elite tight ends anymore. If your name's not Travis Kelce. But then I'm like, he's 30. It's his third team. Is he? How much does he want to be there? Like, it seems like he wasn't very happy to be traded away because his newlywed and his wife plays for Vegas WNBA team. So it's like, I don't know. What do you think of that signing?
Yeah, it makes sense. The upside has to be immense because, like you said, the wide receiver market's thin. They're not going to be able to do much. Maybe they'll bring back Darius Slayton, or they still have Isaiah Hodgins.
And they re-signed Sterling Shepard, which is like,
wow. Great player. Not sure his body is going to hold up. So it just makes sense that Darren Waller, and we saw this with the Raiders, he can be your primary target. He can be a target hog. He can be someone who moves the sticks a lot. And we know that unlike the Cowboys, the Giants are going to overachieve in terms of production or in terms of effectiveness based on the personnel they have. So, and I hope that, Andrew Thomas really came around last year. If Evan Neal comes around this year and you can have the luxury of a tight end who's more of a dedicated, or Daniel Bellinger can be the blocking tight end. So yeah, I think Waller, I think it sets up for a debate of Waller or Andrews as the number 2 tight end. And Lamar Jackson, obviously that uncertainty hangs over the Andrews situation. So I think that it's a lot easier to make the bull case than the bear case on Waller, unless you're just talking about health, or like you said, maybe he's just not necessarily completely on board. It was a really interesting move because I think there was talk, that Waller was going to be a long-term piece, but the Raiders, you mentioned this, and I'm going to highlight this before we just do an abbreviated off the rails, that maybe the most important thing in free agency as a football fan, as a football analyst, is not thumbs up, thumbs down, who won, who lost, who made great moves, who didn't. It's just that these teams show you what their priorities are. I like to say you can't lie during the draft. You can't lie during free agency either. Teams love to lie. They love to throw us off the trail, off the scent. but what you do shows how you value players, how you value your own players, what you stress in terms of what wins games, what matters. And I think the Raiders are just another one that we laugh at probably after putting all their moves together.
Patriots West, say, come on.
Yeah, and it's tough. I mean, Raiders fans, long-suffering fans, but the Vegas fans are probably happy to have a team. All right, real quick off the rail. Okay, did you want to add in one more thing?
I was just going to ask you if you think Aaron Rodgers lobbying for Devontae Adams, calling him the best player in the game, and wishing that the one player that he wished he could have never stopped playing with will steep any kind of Devontae Adams shenanigans trying to get himself released or what have you.
Sure, why not? I mean, in the sense, I don't know about trying to get himself released a la Antonio Brown, right? The ghost of Antonio Brown looms over this conversation. But I do think the Jets are showing that they'll do anything and everything. So you never say never in the NFL. Garrett Wilson could be a Raider for all we know by the time the dust settles, because the Jets have that thirst. All right, real quick. I think this is fun. Just something we touched on before we went on the air. And we agreed that for graybeards, we're enjoying getting older. We're liking it. We're up on the wave. The wave's not pulling us into the undertow. What does that mean to you, that you're embracing getting older and enjoying it?
Yeah, and if you had asked me this 3 years ago, I'd probably have a much different perspective because and we've known each other a long time now. I'm probably healthier now at 48 than I was when I was 30. Just much better shape in what I eat and my fitness. So I feel great. Like it's a cliche, but I definitely feel 10 years younger than I am. And I when I was 45, I felt 55, right? So there's that. But I think too, I know your kiddo's a little younger than mine, but my oldest is turning 20 tomorrow, actually, and my youngest is 14 now. So I think for me, it's really gratifying to be at a place in my wife and my life where I really do genuinely appreciate the journey and what we have and what we've built. And I'm also really excited. I thought that by the time my kids would be this age, I'd have tons of neuroses about, were we good parents? Are they going to be okay in life? What are they going to do when they grad? I don't have that. They're all their own distinct people and very different from one another. And certainly what they do with their lives is to be determined. But like, I have a lot more calm because we've been on our own life journey through those phases. And I think, okay, no, I mean, it all worked out. I mean, I said to my oldest just yesterday, because he's home, it's like I said, it's birthday tomorrow, but he's home for spring break. I said, his name's Colin. I said, Colin, this is going to wig you out, but you turned 20 this week. I was 20 years old when I met Mom, and I've been with her ever since. I'm like, I was literally your age at your point in college in the same cycle of life when I met my life partner. So it's just, I think it's again, for younger listeners, it's going to sound like a cliche, but wisdom is impossible to overvalue, I think. And all wisdom really is, Sig, is life experience, right?
It's just
like
experience,
the wins, the losses, the happiness, the sadness. In my quote unquote shoot job, what I do for a living, and the market's obviously going through some turmoil, but my ability to handle it and be effective at it and not let it keep me from sleeping is totally born out of the fact that I've lived through these economic cycles before doing this for a living, right? Like, it's just, I have the experience. I know that like the sun will rise again tomorrow, right? Like the world will function. It will find a way. We find a way. So I just think it's just that. It's just perspective to not overreact to things, right? To take them in stride, good and bad, just to understand that like tomorrow is another day. There will be challenges. There will be opportunities. And I know, I'm far less of a Zen person than you are. So I'm curious how you answer this one.
Yeah. Well, and I think perspective is the word that keeps coming up. And I think you mentioned also like being able to look back on your life and say, yeah, that was good. What's happened so far. And there's more good to come. And I'm reminded of the classic story, the kind of a Zen parable to go on, like the farmer whose horse runs away. Oh, that's bad. Oh, the horse came back. That's good. Oh, your son was riding one of the wild horses when your horse was gone and fell and broke his leg. That's bad. We'll see. The military came by because his leg was broken. They didn't take him. That's good. Well, we'll see. And it keeps you more even keeled. And fantasy football helps us stay even keeled. And NFL helps us stay even keeled. And all of our friends and everybody who joins us. We love you all so much. Thanks. Enjoyed the rest of free agency.